Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back finally to the next episode of the Runaway Train Sports podcast. It has been a little while since our last episode was finally released, and that I think is because even then some things were happening and some things weren't. And I think finally, now that at least as of the morning of September 25th, I'll preface it by saying that we may actually have some clarity on what is happening and at least a direction to follow. And we have some fun news to prompt this as well, as I'm sure everyone is well aware. We finally have a new schedule. It's only our, I think, 8th or 9th iteration of the the schedule for 2020. The Big Ten finally getting back on board with the football thing, as well as releasing a new 8-game plus 1 schedule as well. And I think that is all we have to talk about today, because as we know, we're Purdue fans and we're not allowed to have nice things. But I think there is maybe something else we can talk about, and that is the fact that Rondale Moore has opted back into the 2020 college football season and will play for Purdue this season. And I think that has gotten everyone rightfully very excited. Probably the most excited some Purdue fans have been in a long while. It is a very welcome sight, a very, very welcome sight to say the least. I know that at least I, and probably along with a lot of other fans, were not expecting this. We knew that, the things that Rondelle has done in the past were far and away enough to get him the looks he needed, but he has opted back to return to Purdue and play with the new, presumably. So the story went that he actually opted out of the season before the Big Ten officially postponed or canceled, however you want to look at it, originally. And so many were thinking that if he did that, they didn't see him, wanting to come back at that point, because even before everything had started, he had made the decision, which I don't think anyone blamed him then or would have blamed him now. But the thought of him opting out originally was primarily just due to the uncertainty in terms of the virus and in terms of the safety precautions or the direction the Big Ten was going to go from those regards. So he opted to take his personal safety into his own hands and opted out. But now, with the extra time as well as the increased scrutiny on the safety precautions, he apparently found it in his best interest, whether, whatever it ended up being, whether it be the safety precautions or, maybe he just really wanted to play football. I think that could also be a pretty valid point. But Rondale Moore will be back in the old gold and black for one, presumably. I think it's probably fair to say more than presumably his last go-round with the Purdue Boilermakers, and I think everyone is very excited to see that come to fruition. We'll get hopefully we'll get a full season of the wide receiver group being at 100%, and boy, what a wide receiver group that would be. So let's talk a little bit more about what's going to happen from here. We are just crossed the 1 month mark until the season officially starts with the first game on October the 24th. So we have some things to cover on our way there. In this episode, I want to touch on a little bit more on what Purdue is getting with Rondale Moore coming back, as well as the finally going over the new schedule that came out. Some looking at Purdue's schedule in particular, as well as some broader takeaways from the conference as a whole, and talk about who won this new schedule, who lost the new schedule. And there are definitely some winners and there are definitely some losers. Although we should preface this by saying that this 8-game schedule was based on the original schedule for 2020. The original 9-game schedule, where they essentially just dropped 1 game. And I think that a lot of fan bases seem to be not taking it as well, I'll put it nicely, but you have to keep in mind that, these schedules were, based on the original schedule, so I'm not sure how much ground they really have to stand on. But we'll touch on that when we get to that point. But first, I want to talk about, the sort of the timeline around what happened when rumblings started to spread throughout the internet that Rondale Moore potentially was considering coming back. And I think for that, we have to go all the way back to the official announcement the Big Ten made, saying that, the Big Ten is going to play in the fall. It's going to start in late October. And immediately everyone, eyes turned towards Rondale Moore. Obviously, Purdue fans wanting to know whether or not he would reconsider his decision to opt out. I believe even that day, Jeff Brom was quoted saying that, he's going to do, obviously, everything he can. Not necessarily everything he can, but he's going to do his due diligence and reach out to Rondale and gauge his level of interest in potentially returning to play in 2020. And that was kind of all we heard. I think from there, it was about a week, maybe a week and a day since that happened, where, so this would have been, I guess, when this was released yesterday. I'm recording it the day this is released, so in the morning. So yesterday, I think in the afternoon, those of you who are paying attention or plugged into Purdue Twitter started to notice some not so, well, I'm not going to say not so cryptic, but some pretty interesting and vague tweets floating around about some potential rumblings about things happening. And rightfully so, everyone wanted to know what was happening, what was going on. And then this was right around, I think, mid-afternoon, so probably between 1 to 2 p.m. Central. So I think this is what that would put it at, 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern, for those of you who are still in the Midwest, that, some things may be happening today. There's been some rumblings that we may be hearing some news soon, either way, but no one knew quite what was happening. And then more and more people started to, pick up the vibe of what was going down, and they wanted to know more. And then finally, I think it was, for me here in central Texas, it was right around a little before 4 that, all of a sudden tweets started flying by saying, you might want to get to ESPN, you might want to get to ESPN. And I immediately jumped over and put on ESPN. It was ESPN2 to be specific. There was the college football live show going on at that moment. And I think not more than 30 seconds after I jumped over, you hear one of the hosts mention that, after their current segment, they were going to be joined by Rondale Moore, and he was going to talk about his plans. And I think a lot of fans heard that, and Twitter essentially exploded with renewed optimism about what this could mean. I know that a lot of fans didn't want to get their hopes up too much, but at the same time, it was hard not to imagine what this means. A lot of people were saying that, why would he go on national television to, just reaffirm that he was going to be sitting out, waiting for the draft. I feel like he could have fallen back on his, previously released statements and things, and, reaffirmed that he was staying in the draft. But one funny thing about that point is that these rumblings started to pick up steam before he appeared on ESPN2. I think it was his Instagram post, his Instagram farewell to Purdue post was taken down. A lot of people noticed that, and that kind of was started to accelerate the rumor mill, and I think a lot of people started to get a lot of optimism about what this announcement could be, because he obviously, by removing, I say obviously, but in removing his farewell post to Purdue, a lot of people took that as, well, maybe this isn't his farewell anymore, and maybe he had changed his mind. And I think his Twitter farewell disappeared shortly after that. So a lot of people were talking about, he removes his farewell post to the Purdue fans. He's about to be on ESPN. Why would you go on ESPN just to say you're not coming back? And thankfully, at 4 p.m. in the afternoon for me, 5 near the end of the day for everyone in the Eastern time zone. Rondale Moore comes out and says the magic words everyone has been hoping for, that he will be returning to Purdue to play in 2020. When asked why he wanted to come back and what he wanted to show America, he quoted saying that he wanted to prove that he was the best wide receiver in the country. And I think that he definitely has the ability to do so, and he definitely will be given the chance to do so. And I think it obviously was big news. With the Big Ten coming back, it was, a lot of eyes turned towards all of those people who had opted out to begin with, and, whether or not they wanted to come back was kind of on them, obviously. But eyes obviously turned, especially as other, top conference star players started to come back and opt back in. Eyes started to turn once again, and then they wanted to know, Rondelle, like, would you consider coming back? And obviously, he comes back, and that just takes Purdue's already. I think a lot of people were expecting a decent amount of success this year, and obviously elevates that so much more. I want to touch on that a bit as well. I may touch on that a bit before moving on to the schedule, which we'll do here shortly. But I know that I think I can speak for a lot of Purdue fans when I say, welcome back, Rondale. You are more than welcome to stay as long as you wish. Thank you for considering coming back, and doing so. I know we are all extremely that much more excited for October 24th when Iowa comes to town, because you just add another level to the wide receiver room, and it is going to be very, very fun. I'm trying to find, someone tweeted yesterday just listing off all of Purdue's wide receivers for 2020, and seeing it listed out was a lot. Seeing it listed out made me realize, I think a lot of people realize that, wow, this is a stacked Purdue receiving core, and it is going to be a lot of fun. And come on, who was it? Let me find it. It was from, who was it? I'm going to try not to trying to find it while I'm doing this. We can also talk about this. So originally, when the cancellation or postponement of the college football season was kind of taking place, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 kind of were not necessarily in lockstep, but they were definitely kind of following each other's lead. It also came out yesterday that apparently the Pac-12 is going to try and play a 7-game college football season starting towards the beginning in November. So for those of you on the West Coast who are missing their football, you apparently have that to look forward to now. And I think it kind of just goes to show that, maybe these conferences kind of were making a bit of a hasty decision, and they could have gotten away with more of just, postponing the season and pushing it continually back and back, rather than saying, we're just not going to play at all. And I think that may have gone over a lot better. Excuse me. So I think it's good that they're trying, or at least they're opening the door for returning to play again. So I think all of the West Coast fans are excited about that. It definitely shows that safety concerns, while still very valid, are finally having some answers for them, and they're able to move forward. So, man, where is this tweet? Let's see. What else can we talk about while I'm scrolling through all of this? Let's see. I know something else I can talk about is, one, everyone is going to absolutely love, everyone in Purdue fandom is absolutely going to love the pairing of Rondelle and David Bell, especially after the season David Bell had last year with Rondelle out. I think opposing DCs are going to have conniptions when the thought of trying to prepare for these Purdue receivers, and it is going to be very tough, because once I finally find this tweet, and I apologize that this is taking so long, but it's going to be worth it, I promise, because just seeing it listed out was eye-opening as well. Just absolutely got me that much more excited, because you start reading down the list and you go, so they have all of these guys plus all of these guys. So I found this first, and this isn't the list, but it is Jeff Brom's comment, official statement that was released immediately after Rondelle opted back in. He released saying, quote, "We are excited to have Rondelle rejoin our team. He is a player of unique talents and character, and everyone knows how much he loves to compete. Rondelle is focused and driven to be the best, and we know that he is ready to show the world that he is better than ever. Let's play football." And I think that's about the best quote you can release when things like this happen, because Jeff Brom knows that this team is better with Rondale Moore, and he knows that, you know, Rondale wanted to do what was best for him, and he, I'm sure, is happy that he's doing what he wants, and he does what makes him happy. So I've officially scrolled back through Twitter enough to find a lot of the GIF reactions, and if you missed Twitter while all this was happening, I highly suggest doing it as soon as possible, but going back and scrolling through it, because it is a lot of very, very, very funny reactions of people being extremely excited, obviously for extremely valid reasons. I still can't find this tweet. I hope they didn't delete it, because it really was eye-opening. Let's see if I can find. And I really want to read it, because it was very, very interesting to me. Is that it? No, let's see. All right, I found a different version. God. Okay, let's see. So now Purdue's wide receiver room reads Rondale Moore, David Bell, Milton Wright, TJ Sheffield, Mershawn Rice, Ahmad Anderson, which I want to talk about Ahmad Anderson after this, Jared Sparks, Marcellus Moore, Jackson Anthrop, Malik Carr coming in, Yassine kid is coming in. It goes so deep. And it's like you get down there towards the end, and you're still talking about guys like Jackson Anthrop, new fast guys like Marcellus Moore, who will be fun to watch if in a limited capacity probably. Milton Wright is going to be, I think, a lot of fun this year. Mershawn Rice, I think, is going to be fun to see as well, because we didn't get to see, I don't think we saw him at all last year. And this is the point where I want to talk about, so I bring up the depth because yesterday, afterwards, I went back and watched some 2018 highlights, and this kind of made me want to talk about a guy who I think could shine this year with all of the attention that obviously Rondale Moore and David Bell are going to draw in terms of coverage and defensive schemes. But I went back and watched, and Ahmad Anderson Jr. was an absolute dog last year. I think there were a handful of times where, you know, I would see plays come up in the video, and I would remember, oh, I remember this play. This is when, you know, Ahmad makes a catch, makes 2 or 3 moves, and all of a sudden is gaining an extra 10, 15 yards. There were multiple occasions where he is always looking to make a play and is routinely, you know, making people miss and gaining an extra handful of yards, whether it be going through people and dragging people or just going around people. And I think with all the attention that Rondale Moore and David Bell are going to attract, I think Ahmad Anderson is setting up perfectly to have an absolute year, because that dude is always looking to make a big play and is always looking to find the open space in as well. So I think any other of the any guys in this wide receiver room are going to be able to make plays. But if that dude gets the ball in his hand with a defense's, you know, third or fourth option on as a defender, I think that man can make a lot of plays, and I think he will make a lot of plays. And if man, I just hope that Purdue's offensive line is able to keep up, because if whoever lines up under center, I think this is going to be true. Obviously, it matters who lines up under center, but if whoever ends up winning the job can just get the ball into the hands of these receivers, I think Purdue is going to have a lot of success this year. And I, for one, am extremely excited for that. But I think we've talked about the Rondelle comeback, and I think we'll have more to talk about in terms of expectations for this year now that we have a definitive start date and we are a month out. But for now, I want to take a quick break, and then we will move on, and I will talk about, the Purdue schedule, as well as some initial reactions to that, plus some quick thoughts on the rest of the schedule as a whole for the rest of the conference. But we'll take a break right now, and then we'll be back. Welcome back. It was a nice needed break. I think I just talked for a long time and got very worked up at the thought of Rondale Moore working back into this wide receiver room. So let's switch gears now, and we'll take a look at the rundown of Purdue's new schedule. I know this was released a few weeks ago, but I kind of wanted to hold off on doing this until we had a bit more definitive answers when it came to, things obviously have changed over the course of a week before, so I wanted to make sure that this was an actual thing that's going to stick for once. So looking at Purdue's new 2020 football schedule, and I think I noted this earlier, but this is based on the original 9-game conference schedule that was released forever ago. So the game Purdue dropped is the game against Michigan, so I think they definitely won on that front. But the season begins on October 24th at home with the Iowa Hawkeyes coming to visit. And then obviously this is 8 games with no bye week. So these are 8 games in 8 weeks, which will be interesting to see. And I think we can touch on that a bit after as well. But the schedule reads: home against Iowa, away at Illinois, away at Wisconsin, which is always tough, home against Northwestern, which I think is a win for Purdue, away at Minnesota, which is going to be tough, a home game against Rutgers, a home game against Nebraska, which was flipped from an away game to a home game, and then finishing the season away at Indiana. Then there's the +1 game that will take place in the conference championship week, which will try to pit the just going across division, saying obviously whoever wins both divisions is going to play for the conference championship, and then they're going to do their best to match up number 2 versus number 2, number 3 versus number 3. They have come out and said that they're going to try and avoid repeated matchups. So it won't be a true number 2 to number 2. It won't be a true horizontal shift. It'll be as close as they can get while avoiding rematches, which I am fine with, because no one wants to play the same team twice in the same year. But at the same time, I think playing straight across would have been a very interesting dynamic, and I think it would add a layer that would be very interesting to see. And I think they should keep this +1 thing past this year, because I think it adds a very fun thing to conference championship week that adds a layer that I think a lot of people will enjoy. So we'll see what happens with that going forward. But obviously, a very much more favorable schedule than I believe their previous schedule that was released before the season was actually postponed for the first time. So it was the second schedule we got, which I think we picked up Ohio State on the schedule as well, which a lot of fans like to joke about, but at the same time is obviously extremely tough. And then obviously with this new 8-game schedule, we also drop the game against Michigan. We drop the added game against Ohio State, and we keep the home game against Rutgers, and actually flip the Nebraska game from an away game to a home game. And at the cost of that, we did flip the Wisconsin game from a home game to an away game. So I think in terms of winnability, I think I would prefer that. Not that I don't think we can beat Wisconsin, but in terms of this season in particular, in which Purdue needs to win, as many games as possible, I think getting Nebraska flipped to home gives us the best opportunity for that. Starting off the season with a visit from Iowa. Purdue and Iowa have played some pretty tough matchups the last handful of years, but I think getting them first, I think, is going to be either a very big advantage to Purdue, or having a healthy Iowa team coming to Ross State is going to keep it fairly even. I think it will be a tough start, and we'll learn a lot about this Purdue squad in this first game, absolutely, and kind of get an idea of what we can expect going forward. And it's going to be a tough one. We'll talk more about this as we move forward. We'll move back towards some season preview things starting this coming week. Now that we have a definitive schedule and apparently a football season is going to be played. So we'll cover that before. Other big games, or other things of note, obviously I touched on the Wisconsin game flipping from a home game to an away game. And I mentioned I think I'd rather trade that off with the Nebraska game in terms of this. And I think I'll stand by that. I know that a lot of Purdue fans want to get off the Wisconsin snide and want to finally beat the Badgers again for the first time in far too long. But in a year like this, I think you need to take the victories where you can. And the first victory being football at all. And two, Purdue still somehow has managed to play Wisconsin tough. Maybe not necessarily close, but tough. Even playing in Camp Randall. So I think that'll be an interesting game to watch for sure. The home game against Northwestern definitely obviously favors Purdue. The trip to Minnesota, there'll be a lot of tempers flaring in that matchup, I'm sure, just due to the past few years of talk of fans, between fans on the internet. The 2-game stretch of home against Rutgers, home against Nebraska is going to be very favorable to Purdue. Obviously, Purdue gets the matchup with Rutgers, which is still transitioning in their new program under Schiano. And then the Nebraska flip from away to home obviously is going to, I think, favor Purdue in this one, especially even without fans, or maybe at this point they do allow some fans, is definitely going to favor the Boilermakers in this one. Nebraska and Purdue have played close since Brom got here, and I think this year will be no exception depending on how Nebraska does and handles their tough schedule, which we'll touch on here in a moment as well. And then obviously finishing the season at Indiana is a game you want no matter the season, no matter the cost. So I think that game could be a fun one as well. So how do I think this schedule matches up? I think it's about as favorable as the schedule you could have in terms for Purdue. Obviously, dropping the game against Michigan, very fortunate. Dropping, the added game of Ohio State, obviously also extremely fortunate. So in terms of crossovers, I think it's about as good as it can get with Rutgers and IU. And the in-division games, I think, also kind of line up pretty well with getting Iowa, Northwestern, and Nebraska at home. Purdue going to Illinois has found some success in recent years. So there is always some optimism with that game. And then the away games at Wisconsin and at Minnesota are going to be very tough challenges that personally I'm just looking for Purdue to come out of those games healthy and to fight, but I would not be disappointed with losses because Wisconsin has had our number since 2003, and Minnesota definitely has a talent advantage, and going to Minnesota in late November is definitely going to favor the home team in that one. So we'll quickly shift focus to the Big Ten as a whole. I won't spend too much time on this because, I don't think too many people outside of Purdue fans listen to this thing yet. So let's just quickly touch on, some big storylines that are coming out from the schedule as a whole. Talk about some big winners, the biggest winners from the schedule, the newest schedule. And I think Ohio State definitely is a big winner from this. They avoid they avoid all of the Big Ten West top teams. So their schedule runs down. Their cross-division games include Nebraska at home and Illinois on the road. So I think that lines up pretty favorably for them. They also have Penn State on the road, Maryland on the road, and Michigan State on the road. And then their home games are Indiana, Michigan, and Rutgers. So I think that lines up about as favorably as possible in terms of the cross-divisional games, as well as their divisional games. I mean, they do travel to Penn State and Michigan State, but Michigan State is not the same Michigan State team of recent years. The trip to Penn State will definitely be their toughest test of the year, and they get them in week 2 on Halloween. So unless things do get spooky, I think Ohio State has definitely been set up to the best of their ability to make a push for the playoff. Let's see, who else? Some conference fans have noted that Purdue definitely got a favorable schedule. I touched on that. Minnesota also has a favorable-ish schedule. They do get Michigan in their first game, but from there, I think let's take a look. Their other cross-divisional game is at Maryland, so I think they definitely win points for that. So, but starting the season with Michigan, I think, is probably best case scenario for them, and that'll be a fun one to watch. Let's see, who else? I know Wisconsin. There's been rumblings that Wisconsin got a pretty favorable schedule as well. They do not avoid a trip to Michigan, but their other cross-divisional game is a home game against Indiana. So obviously they have to travel to Michigan, but they avoid Ohio State, they avoid Penn State, and their in-divisional games include a home game against Illinois and a away trip to Nebraska, home against Purdue, at Northwestern, home against Minnesota, and then they finish the season at Iowa. So they definitely they avoided the 2 top teams in the East, and they'll be patting themselves on the back for that for sure. Let's see. In terms of I did read this. So in terms of crossovers, Rutgers has to be mentioned as a winner because their crossovers are Illinois and Purdue. So I guess in terms of avoiding the crossover powers, I think they also won a bit in that game. But it seems like Ohio State definitely is, at least in terms of the layman fans' opinion, is definitely the biggest winner of the new schedule. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you have some teams who definitely got hammered a bit. Let's see. Obviously, we'll talk about Nebraska, who got absolutely got taken to the woodshed in terms of getting their schedule. Their cross-division games include Ohio State and Penn State. They traveled to Ohio State to start the season, which is going to be extremely tough. They get the Penn State at home, but without fans, who knows what that game is actually going to be like for them. Man, that is an extremely, extremely tough slate. Their in-division games include a home game against Wisconsin, away game at Northwestern, home against Illinois, away at Iowa, away at Purdue, and then home against Minnesota. So in terms of cross-divisional games, they definitely are the losers, getting the 2 of the top 3 teams in the East, as well as starting the season at Ohio State, which, hopefully that doesn't set a tone for the season to come. But that's about as tough of a crossover schedule as you can get. And we won't touch on Nebraska fans or even their athletic director apparently not wanting to be a championship whiner, but also coming out and whining about the schedule that they got. They think they're being targeted by the Big Ten, after forgetting the fact that they had 8 of their players sue the Big Ten to play football. So we won't touch on that. We may touch on it a bit in Nebraska Week later. But as of right now, we'll leave that there. Let's see. Any other big things about the schedule? I'm not going to go into much more detail about it because I think those are definitely the biggest storylines when it comes to the national level. I think a lot of things fans need to keep in mind is that these schedules were based on the original 9-game conference schedule, and where they essentially just had to go and drop a game. And some teams obviously are going to get some favorable schedules, and some teams are definitely going to get some unfavorable schedules. Nebraska, some and the favorable ones. I think it's unfair to say Ohio State got a favorable schedule, because when you're the best team in the conference, in theory, you should already be winning every game. So even more, So I think in a better example of favorable cross-divisional games is, like I mentioned, Rutgers, who got Illinois and Purdue. Wisconsin was pretty favorable, only gaining a trip to Michigan and then avoiding Ohio State and Penn State. And so I think it is it's a lot of speculation, it's a lot of personal opinion, and I, for one, am going to continue to operate under the guise of I'm happy to have football at all. I'm happy that Rondale Moore has opted to come back to finish his career at Purdue with one more season. What this season ends up looking like, I don't think anyone knows. I think the only thing people do know is that we are likely to get at least one game of football. And I think we all will take that no matter what. So I think we'll wrap this up here for now. I thank you for joining me on this episode 11, I believe, of the Runaway Train Sports Podcast. We're finally breaking into our second decade of episodes. And you can expect to find more content come, especially as we get closer and closer to the first game. We'll start taking a look back at the teams, kind of see what the teams are shaping up to look like now, with players who have opted in. Some players may yet to decide to opt out, but we will cover those as we come. All eyes turn to Iowa on October 24th when the Hawkeyes come to West Lafayette to visit, and we will see what happens then. But for now, thank you for joining me. Let us all go out and celebrate this weekend that Rondelle has decided to come back and finish his season in the old gold and black. And as always, boiler up, hammer down, hail Purdue, beat Iowa.